Hey everybody, it's Rob back with another episode of Breakthrough. Today, I'm with Luke Burrows, who is joining me from the UK. I'm super happy to have you, Luke. Luke is a podcaster and entrepreneur whose mission is to raise the level of human consciousness. So, Luke, before we get into it, let's just define what you mean by raising human consciousness.
Yeah, so I've been on this crazy journey over the past like 3 to 5 years within my own entrepreneurial journey, and it was no wait, we're in 23, so it was in 21, towards the end of 21, that I kind of realized that actually a lot of what I was doing at the time, very much like in the personal growth world, personal development world, was focused around helping people to be better or ultimately like better human beings. And I was kind of like reflecting on that, like actually, what does that mean? And actually, what that means is for us to elevate and to raise our consciousness, right? So, I always use like my uh, fitness journey and my health journey as an example of that. Not that I was like super unhealthy or anything before, but there was so much stuff that I didn't know about exercise, about different foods and what they do for you because they were out of my consciousness, right? I didn't know about them. I wasn't taught about them. It wasn't in the education system. We got taught about a bunch of other shit that I haven't used since, so all of that stuff, all of that knowledge, all of that wisdom, all of that information was out of my level of consciousness, right? So for me to so I realized that and that's actually how I started my podcast, Raising Consciousness, was that I wanted to have those types of conversations that wasn't getting spoke about in the status quo or in society, really to help people therefore to be better human beings ultimately and inspire them to live healthier, happier, more fulfilling lives. You obviously also then have, as I've dug more into this work, the more spiritual kind of element of consciousness as well, which is there. Obviously, with that side, like not everyone believes in that side. I do, so I always say that I mean, it looks spiritual, right? But I believe like we're all connected and we're all part of something bigger. Like there's I'm a huge Gary Vaynerchuk fan. I'm not sure if you've heard of him, and
Yep.
he talks about this kind of concept of like 400 trillion to one, I think it is, right? Like the chances of being a human being. And so when I was like reflecting on that, it was so if the chances of being a human being is 400 trillion to one, then what's the odds of us being here? So um for me, like that linked into it because it was like therefore we all have a purpose. There's a reason for why we are here, right? Like because it's just such of a gift. It's such of a crazy that statistic. So um that that stat and other learnings and wisdoms that I picked up along the way just has just made me develop the belief more that we're all here for a purpose, and really more got into the spiritual and kind of side, because there's again like there's a purpose, there's a reason for us being here ultimately, and I believe that to be true. So, yeah, to go back to your original question with consciousness, I think you have I see it as having the two sides of the spiritual side, how we're all connected. Also, like I'm not sure if you're familiar with like universal principles and stuff that every day, I see come up in life, my life and other people's lives, and then you have like what I call maybe more the intellect mind side of just like all of the wisdom and all of the knowledge that we're not that at this moment we don't currently know. And so what I try and do is bring um the two together for my own insights around them and then share them to hopefully raise raise consciousness ultimately.
So it sounds like consciousness is tied for you somewhat closely with awareness. Like you mentioned with your fitness journey,
Mm,
that you had made lifestyle changes because you weren't aware of uh, certain
mm,
elements or whatever. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Because one thing that I find myself speaking about with many people, especially on my podcast, and it's a huge area of interest of mine, is fitness, the body mind connection, and all of that. So how did that impact you on your journey to get more into this mission to help people develop their level of consciousness? Like, how does the fitness aspect tie into that?
Sure. So, I mean, you make a great point. Yeah, like, and I always actually, for people who maybe aren't in the personal growth space or aren't consciously, right, actively improving themselves, because for whatever reason, like 6, 7 years ago, like I wasn't, although I believed that there was more out there, although I believe like I had a purpose, as I was talking about beforehand, I was in a 9 to 5, super depressed and even I guess less conscious of that, than I am now. Um, and so, for those people, I always kind of go back to, as you said, about awareness, right? And so for those who think kind of consciousness, like what is that? I go back to that word that actually is awareness, and I think the start of that is self-awareness, being aware of oneself, your strengths, your skills, your gifts, your talents. Um, and I think that is where it starts. And obviously, that's where it started for me, particularly in terms of my fitness journey. I mean, yeah, if I go back to that time where I was probably at my lowest point, I was working a 9 to 5, I was going through the 9 to 5 routine, right? Like waking up. I was actually usually late for work because I woke up at like 8 a.m. and I had to be there at 9. Um, rushing, super stressed, super in, fight or flight mode. Got in the car, like really stressed. Like I had like many panic attacks on the way to work. It just really wasn't a nice experience. Got there, work was really boring. Yeah, and I just ultimately I don't usually like to use the words of like hate or anything, but just really hated the job. And I was living that life. Outside of that, there were things going on in like my social life. So ultimately, like I wasn't living what now I don't think I've coined this term, it's been out there, but like this kind of idea of living full out, right? And living and becoming a better version of ourselves and again creating our healthiest and most happiest life. So if I go back to that time, like what wasn't I doing from a health point? Probably like completely the opposite of what I'm doing now, right? So like I wasn't moving my body, I wasn't exercising. Realized that actually that's what that's what our bodies are designed to do, right? They're not designed to sit at a desk all day, in 9 to 5 in an office space. They're designed to move. Ultimately, nutrition. I've learned so much about nutrition. I actually used to be very closed-minded, I guess, and not want to like try new foods, right? Very very closed mindset, very fixed mindset, and even like over the past year, my palate, I guess, is like completely different to what it was once before. Interestingly, wouldn't say I was a binge eater in terms of like chocolate or anything like that, but my just what I was eating, it was like what I um grew up on, and so I was not open to trying, you know, anything new ultimately. Sleep, yeah, I mean, sleep also another major fact. I was going to bed not super late, like 2 in the morning or something, but um, midnight, half 11, etc. Um, and if I look at what I do today, like all of that's changed. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think in terms of health, there's like so many different kind of paths and avenues that we can go down and talk about ultimately. But I think the how I started to raise my own consciousness, I guess, in terms of that specific area. It was so I knew that so something that was really easy for me to just start ultimately was running, So I was never been a very like big into the gym or weights or anything like that, but I was more open to just kind of running. So I just started like running ultimately. I think sometimes when you get to that low point, the only way is up, right? And so I think that's ultimately where I was at. And because also my social life wasn't really active, I was just usually spending a lot of time at home. So, just started running in the evenings, etc. And then as I look back, like over time, it's like elevated to where, now I have more of a balanced exercise regime across all the different sorts types of movement, etc. And so I think the lesson there for people is to just start where you're at. Ultimately, like, because along that journey, along that path, you're gonna find people to help you. You're going to come across, if it's books or podcasts or information online, that gradually is going to raise your consciousness, And I think that's one of the biggest lessons that I learned, is that the art of just like starting something. So for people who are listening, it might not be running, and they might hate running, right? But they might like walking, and might just start with a walk, a 20-minute walk after lunch tomorrow, but that simple action step over time, when they build that habit, for me, it then, I guess, like, it elevated my curiosity as well to other other ways at how I could improve my health. And yeah, that's ultimately been my journey. But yeah, in terms of, because health is such also a huge topic. There's lots of different kind of things that we can specifically touch on if you want to. But that's basically being a really potted version of my journey, that I just started with something that was very natural to me, that felt good. And yeah, and then it's just kind of the last 18 months, 2 years have just kind of gone out like that.
I think it's a very relatable situation that a lot of people probably find themselves in. And I personally think back to a similar situation I had working 9 to 5. And I guess technically I still do work a 9 to 5, but at one point I was in between jobs. I had been working in media like for the past 10 years almost. But in between jobs, I took a position as a marketing consultant at some construction companies, very outside of my field of expertise. And I started working at this place out of necessity, basically, because I needed something. It was a 9 to 5. I was working in a poorly lit corner office cubicle on an old computer, like doing boring things. And I relate to like the panic attacks on the way to work. That happened to me. Like I would try to go for walks at lunch just to calm myself down and clear my mind, but it was not happening. And I think I lasted there 10 weeks maybe before I quit. Because it just wasn't sustainable. So I feel for people who find themselves permanently in these situations and struggle to get out. It's a conversation I was having with a friend just yesterday. It's unfortunate that a lot of people, that becomes their norm.
Totally. And I have like people quite close to me, who it's evident, right, that they are in careers and jobs that they hate. But when you're in that rut, and for me, in my 9 to 5, like, I knew probably 18 months into it that wasn't for me, but I stayed there for 5 years. So it's like, you know, so oftentimes, I like, when I look at that, there's obviously the for both sides of it. A lot of gurus and coaches out there would say, like, quit and start your business, etc. For me, like, I guess you also have the realism, I guess, if that's even a word, of the situation that you're in, right? And while I didn't have like a mortgage or anything, I still had responsibilities and bills to pay, right? So just quitting wasn't as simple as these people on Instagram might make that out to be. And so it's a balance between having that plan or having some sort of vision for where you want to get to that allows you to leave that job and situation, compared with just accepting it for what it is and staying there for 10, 20, 30 years, and hating every second of it, because work is such a huge part of our life, and it can cause detrimental effects to our health and our well-being, right? So on that point, I would definitely recommend, if people are listening to this and they find themselves in that position, like, I understand, I empathize, that we all have bills to pay, and just quitting might not be as simple as people make it out to be. Have that place in your mind clear on, like, actually, where do I want to be? Do I want to run my own business? Do I want to work in this industry? Or what's the makeup of that job or career that I want to move into, and start to every day take action steps in that way. I mean, like, for me, I left that job and I went into a more of a, well, more of a, I went into like a remote working job, right? Which suited me much better, much more flexible. I could do it around my business, around the podcast, etc., etc. But it took me, I was at the 9 to 5 for 5 years before that was able to happen. So we're all, again, like we're all on different journeys. My fear, I guess, for people is that they just accept the situation that they're in and then lose all hope. Because if we don't have hope or faith for our future and where we're heading, and then every day starts to take micro steps to that point, then what's the point ultimately? So I know a lot of people in those situations, and I try and use my experience to share with some wisdom to help them to move out of them.
I think that's super important. I'm curious to know where you think that, generally speaking, the level of human consciousness is at across the board, because there, as you mentioned, there's a lot of content creators out there that are spreading these kinds of messages, the same things that you're sharing, and I guess myself to a certain extent also. And there's an appetite for this type of content too. People are interested in sharing their stories with each other and trying to break out of the social norms that have kind of locked us into these rigid lifestyles. And we see it changing with the remote work possibilities that are popping up now, made possible, I guess, since the pandemic. For a lot of us, it's changed our work situations, sometimes for the better. So where do you think we're at, globally, in terms of level of consciousness, and is it something that's improving in your mind?
That's a really interesting question. I've never been asked that before, my friend. So, let me ponder on that one. So, I mean, so let me go back to consciousness a bit. So, one thing I probably didn't mention on consciousness, how I also see it, is how, and maybe it's more like the kind of in between the intellect and the spirit side, is how, let's say, how so how if I show up in my environment, right? Let's just say at home, and I'm in a state of anger, or I'm in any emotional state. I think that, well, no. So consciousness is also the awareness of like how I am showing up in that environment is having an effect on the people around me, right? Um, and so I created like this kind of model. I was playing with it on how like we have that on multiple scales. So how I'm showing up in my immediate environment and how that has the effect on the people around me, to how I'm showing up, therefore, like generally in life, and how that's having an effect on, let's say, my neighborhood, right? Like we don't even think about that. So an example, I want a tight example, so because otherwise people might think I'm a bit crazy. So like let's just say I'm in any state, and I go out and I see a neighbor and I react in a certain way. That is then going to have an effect on them and potentially the rest of their day. But we don't think about that. And so I see this on social media, right, where we just trolls and people who are in pain within themselves. So they go onto these social media sites and they spread hate and toxicity, etc., without the awareness, right, without the consciousness of the effect that has on the other person.
Right.
So I think that, and this, I've kind of like created a model on this, and it kind of goes on multiple scales to like the world at large, right? How I am showing up right here has an effect on the world at large, because it's having an effect on all of your listeners who I don't know, right? I don't know your listeners, but our conversation is having an effect. So that for me is also part of consciousness. And I think that from that perspective, I think that as a collective, again, like I live in a sort of small town in the UK, right? So I'm quite humble. Like I have no real idea what's going on in the world, like as such type of thing, because I don't watch the news. I think actually the news is very much in the victim state of consciousness, right? And people who watch the news are often in that place as well of like, oh, the world's being done to me, rather than being I call it like being a creator, right? And kind of getting out there and sharing positivity and inspiration and helping people to move the world forward, and not staying where we are, or even going backwards. So I think from my perspective, I think that there are things in the world that have elevated, and I think there are things in the world that have declined. And so if we add them all up, I would probably say that we are at a neutral. But if we're actually at a neutral, are we actually going backwards? And what I mean by that, I heard this very fascinating concept by a guy called Dr. Reverend Michael Beckwith, I think his name was. And this is very much moving into like more of the spiritual element, but stay with me. So he was talking about how all of the planets go through their orbits throughout the year, and therefore it'll elevate to a new higher degree of consciousness, right? Because we're all going through our orbits and we're all moving upwards ultimately. If us as human beings aren't growing, then I think like relatively, we're actually going backwards because everything else is moving forwards. Does that make sense?
Right. So being stationary means that you're falling farther behind everything else that is moving
Because
forward. Yeah.
exactly. So I actually think that that's where we are at as a collective, because everything else is moving forwards.
Okay, that makes a sense. That makes sense, and it's an interesting concept for sure. I never thought of it that way, but yeah, you bring up a good point. And one other thing that I wanted to add is that with the presence of the internet now, it's opened up a lot of doors for people. Access to information has never been so available, which is it can be a good thing, and it can also be a very overwhelming thing. So how do you navigate that yourself with the abundance of information at your disposal, and how do you sort through it and make sense of the world in that way?
Curiosity, like just being curious, So I have my go-to people, if you like. So there's a great podcast. It's called The Model Health Show, seeing as we've spoke about health a lot, by a guy called Sean Stevenson. So that's like one of my number one podcasts for everything related to health, fitness, longevity, all of that fun stuff. And there's probably like two other guys that I probably listen to because I see them as experts in their field. But if I come across an article, or if I come across a new podcast, or if I come across a piece of information online, I don't instantly try to dismiss it, but I'm curious about it. And it's oftentimes I kind of like go down these rabbit holes of like actually finding out um, like the source, or like where that thinking is coming from, right? So let's just say there's like a new type of, I don't know, exercise workout. We're very much focusing on this theme, but that's somebody wrote an article about. A lot of people maybe would dismiss it because they have their regime and they're doing that, right? And there's place for that. For me, like I know what I'm doing. I'm going to stick with what I'm doing, but I'm also curious about this thing over here. And when I maybe have 10 minutes on a Saturday morning while I'm a passenger in the car, like I would research that and kind of go down that rabbit hole ultimately to learn more about it, right? Because that's how actually I've got to where I'm at. If I was so fixed, in that fixed mindset state, I would still be focusing so much on running because that was the thing that I love to do. Where now I do resistance training, right? Every morning I do like my breath work and yoga practice, right? But if I was so fixed on the thing that I started with, I would never have started those other practices and have more of a holistic, as I like to call it, way to living life now. So um, yeah, I think obviously like always check maybe the source. I also think like I see myself as a very intuitive person as well. So I also ask the question like, does whatever I'm researching, there's a great question for this. So does that feel true for me for now? Right? It's a great question to help people to become more intuitive, right? And so I also like checking with myself. So let's say this guy promoting this new type of exercise, and it's meant to be really, really good. I'm curious about it. I research it. Checking in with myself. Does this feel true for me? Like, is this something I could do, integrate right now? Does this feel true for me for this moment? No, I'm just gonna leave it. Let's just say 6 months it comes up again. Could be something in this. So I'm like, go back to it. And I just kind of like navigate my way like that sometimes because I'm not perfect. I'm not perfect, Rob. I do get caught up on, an article or maybe something I listen to and, kind of go down that rabbit hole and like overthink about it and, like, oh, I'm not doing that, like, why not? Kind of maybe sometimes beat myself up about that because I'm very much on this mindset of like progress and growth and wanting to improve and get better. But then I try and come back to that question of actually does this feel true for me? And so I just try and navigate not just information but the world like that. In terms of social, I always try to focus on the positives because I believe that you find what you look for. So I can go on Twitter right now and find 5,000 pieces and more pieces of content that are bad or negative or, is causing hurt in some way. Or I could go on there and find 5,000 pieces of content that is positive, that's spreading good messages, is loving, kind, all that sort of stuff. So it's like, what am I going to choose to do? Am I going to choose to follow that troll or negative person, or am I going to follow that account that actually adds and gives me value, right? So it's that question ultimately. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many different avenues that we can go down with this. But I think that there's really something to the intuition that you mentioned, following your
Okay,
intuition,
cool. Hmm.
how something feels to you when you're exposed to it. Because with the media, and you mentioned the news before and how it's coming from a place of victimization, which
Hmm.
I couldn't agree with more. And I studied journalism, and I quickly moved away from the type of news media landscape that I saw out there, because I recognized that it just wasn't for me, and it wasn't promoting the same kind of messages that I wanted to, because everything has become very polarizing. And it extends like way beyond the news into even into the realms of health, like we've been talking about nutrition. You have the carnivore diet versus the vegan diet. What's better? And people in these different camps fighting for their cause. And everything has become dogmatic for a lot of people. They live by the laws that they live by, and there's very little flexibility. So I'm happy to hear that you take in pieces of information with an open spirit, an open mind, and just evaluate it like that. Because from day to day, you can look at the same piece of content and see it in two different ways depending on the how you're
Hmm.
feeling internally that day. So
Yeah, sure.
yeah, everybody's reaction will be very different if they just listen to themselves.
Yeah, like on that point. So I also try to take bits from kind of, if I use a blanket term, of everywhere and use it to form my own insights and then to create my own life, right? Like to become the creator of my own destiny ultimately. So using the diet thing is an example. So I'm not sure if it was like a year ago, I came across this concept of intermittent fasting. You're probably familiar with it. And I was like, very interesting. Um, and there's those people who are like 16/8 or 20, one meal a day, like very hard stream, and I'm like, does that work for me? Like, do I feel no? So then I tried implementing like one day, 2 days, different days during the week depending on my training schedule, until I find something that works, that I feel works for me based on how it makes me feel, how it adds quality to my life, and so I think one thing that just generally in life that we, in the personal growth space, and I also kind of wrap health in that as well, is that we fail to recognize that we are individuals, right? So something that is going to work for me might not work for you. Like if I come to you and be like, only eat a vegan based diet, right? But what happens if your gut microbiome, etc., doesn't resonate or doesn't digest? Is probably a better word. Certain foods within that, like, I think then your so many other foods then have been cut off to you, right? And I think that's what we do within, like, using that example, is that when we focus on like one specific food group or one specific training, or in life in general, one specific area. And yes, we could be passionate about it. It resonates with our values, which I think this is what it all comes down to, right? It all comes down to our values, which is then usually linked to in some sort of way like our belief system, which we form as we grow up, right? So it is also like a game of values, and we will have different values, right? And so it also brings it full circle back around to just the point of consciousness, right? Of understanding that if we can get to a point where we understand that something that works for me might not work for that person, but if, let's just say, something that I'm doing is cured something, right? So use my anxiety as an example that I had many years ago. There were a few things that stand out to me that I did. So I may share those with somebody who's also having a hard time, with the understanding in mind that those things might not work for him, like exactly how I did them, but he can take inspiration from that. He can take hope from that. He can take maybe one thing and implement it, which then sets him or her on their path to overcoming anxiety, right? And so this is what I mean by like, this is all just one big game of consciousness and awareness, rather than us being so, I just said, like polarizing, forceful on people to put our agenda and our thoughts and our beliefs onto other people, our values onto other people, and just recognizing that, okay, there might be some value in what's working for me, and so I'm just going to share it openly, freely, so other people pick up on stuff, so that they can start their own transformation journey and hopefully change their lives to the better.
Definitely. That's a great message. I want to talk a little bit about your some of your projects, your business projects. I came across your website and I noticed your 2025 vision. So can you take me through that? I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, so like business wise, over the past 6 months, it's like been crazy. So basically, I came across this concept of like a vivid vision back in, I think, June last year, and it really resonated with me, because a lot of people, when they come beforehand, this is like last year, what do you do? It was very hard for me to put it into like like one sentence of what I done, right? And so through it's actually a program I took about creating a vision that draws people in, and gets people to resonate with like this big vision, this mission, this purpose that we're moving towards. And so I created kind of went for this program, created this document that basically breaks down the business into its kind of main core area. So like, I guess traditionally you would call them departments. Like, what does the marketing and media department like look like and feel like, right? So what does the culture look like and feel like? So for us, or for me, what really wanting to create a business and a culture that is very focused on like remote working, work from anywhere else in the world. It's very performance focused. So and focused on work from anywhere in the world, just get the work done. I don't care if you're in Bali right now, like I'm in the UK, but like, get it done. I have a team member who I'm working with, who's focusing on email marketing, who South Africa, he is, and we communicate online, right? One of the great benefits of tech, right? Of this thing called the internet, that when we used can be used as a tool, not as a barrier. So so that's basically what our culture, the vision for our culture is all about. And it kind of breaks it down also down into the values, the things that we stand for. So things like loving kindness, positive optimism. It breaks it down into actually our main. So this is what I found challenging when going through this. There's like a lot of like buzzwords. I don't know if you found this, Rob, of like mission and purpose, etc. And I came across this concept of like, just put it into like one, right? And so that's ultimately what we've done now, is to put everything that we're doing into this kind of one focused driving force that, as you said at the beginning, is to raise human consciousness to ultimately create a better world for current and future generations, and inspire humans to be better humans, and live full out. So that's what we're striving towards. That's what we're moving towards. So yeah, people can definitely check out the document, because it's to go through to go through all of it. I'll be here a very long time, but just so people know, like breaks down our vision for like each main department, what they feel like, uh, yeah, like how we're going to show up every single day. And and as I said, like with the culture side, it's very much about um, being connected as a team, because that's like reflecting, and that's really important to me, because reflecting back on my career, I guess up to this point, a lot of the jobs that I've done, I haven't enjoyed, right? I haven't liked, and some of them is because it's been very rigid. Like the office job, you're very in this building at this desk, restricted, right? There's no freedom there. Like there's no creativity, and so we want to really install that into what we're doing. To that's obviously why we're working remotely. To like having that bigger vision. The job that I transitioned into that was more about remote working was great, but still showing up every day and questioning, like, actually, what are we doing here? What's the thing that we're moving towards? And hopefully, sharing the mission that I just have, we also have that, and we've kind of laid out what that actually looks like and feels like as well. So yeah, it's been interesting 6 to 8 months, like business wise. I actually took a little bit of a pause to kind of reflect on all of this, as well, and like this year, like picking it back up, as well, and going full force. We're actually in the process of rebranding. So the company was also called, the same name as the podcast, Raising Consciousness, but we're changing the name to, so the acronym is LFO, which stands to Live Full Out, because I felt like that really resonated, with what we're actually also trying to accomplish, because not a lot of people know what consciousness is, right? Like I also found that, when I was going around like raising consciousness, not a lot of people knew what that was. And so this new message that we also have, it's still very much about that, but also the underlying thing is like, actually, why are we raising consciousness as well? To create that better world, and to inspire people to live full out, which I'm sure, well, hopefully we can also talk about as well.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, if you want to go down that path, you're more than welcome. Tell me more about the podcast. Tell me more about your initiatives, like outside of that. If I'm not, I think I saw something about a clothing brand also on your website. Like
Yeah.
what else? What else is there aside from the media initiative?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, like we're bringing everything together. So beforehand, like within Raven Consciousness, we had like the main business that was focused on like coaching and media with the podcast and stuff, and then we had like a side, so kind of two side brands, which was one was called Think Different, that was focused more on working with businesses, who wanted to think different and create this new emerging world ultimately, and it was a lot around kind of culture work and team building and kind of that sort of stuff. Because I realized actually one way that we can raise consciousness is through business, right? And within our culture kind of workspaces. And then the other one was called, so as you mentioned there, an apparel brand that was called Just Gratitude. Um, Ultimately, moving into this new year, we're just moving everything into one brand, as I mentioned beforehand. So it's called LFO, which stands for Live Full Out. The podcast is still goes by the name of Raising Consciousness, because that's more of like my thing that brings awareness, I guess, to like more of the business side. Because there I am having conversations with people that raise consciousness, but more on the business side, we're changing. And so like the apparel thing that we're doing, kind of all this stuff is just coming under one roof. Um, and yeah, to inspire people to become better humans and live full out ultimately. For me that means, um, so I always had like this, I guess maybe it's a fear within myself, Rob, of like getting to the end of my life. I'm still only in my 20s, so I'm thinking like hopefully a good 70 years away, fingers crossed, right? Of like getting to the end and feeling like I haven't lived my best life, we could say, or I just haven't lived full out ultimately. that deep fear of regret, that I think there was like studies that people have done on people in their like 80s and 90s, and like their biggest fears, their or their biggest worries and concerns and regrets that they had. And it's things like I didn't love or didn't show and appreciate enough, or I stayed in a job or a career that I should have left and followed my dream of starting this business. And I don't want that, first and foremost, to be me, right? And secondly, I don't want that actually that for anyone else. Or to be honest, like even if anyone, even if they are, even if somebody says like they're the worst person in the world, like I don't want that for anyone, and so that inspired this change ultimately of and it's really a change around the message, because I think that because I still think it's part of raising consciousness. So there's more a change around the message that people can resonate with it, hopefully more, of living full out. And that looks and feels and is something different for us all, with the underlying kind of foundation of getting to the end of our lives. And actually, when you're on your, in your rocking chair or wherever, and you're about to, whether you believe in like the next incarnation or not, whatever happens on the other side of when we're not here anymore, you like in that moment, that actually you lived full out, like that you loved your parents or your spouse or your family and your friends, and like you've done everything that you could, that you pursued your dream of running a business, rather than getting to that place in time of like, actually I should have, I could have, I would have, if this, and kind of all of these again regrets, because then I believe it's too late. Now, people often say like, actually we're always going to have regrets in life, and I kind of agree. I've kind of learned to agree to a certain point, but I think that there's a difference. I think that looking back, do I regret staying at the 9 to 5 for 5 years? Yeah, ultimately, because it was in that moment, it was actually quite a lot period of time. But then looking forward, I've got like how many other years ahead of me, and actually 5 years in the scheme of my life is actually a very short period of time. So I kind of have mixed feelings about that, with a little bit of regret. I guess the difference is, and there's been choices that I've look back on, maybe I could have done this and all that. But I think that the whole part of this, and the whole part, also part of living full out, is that we learn from these experiences. So overall, over a 80, 90 year lifespan, we can collectively say that we lived full out. Of course, at times there's going to be certain moments, but that's all that they are. They aren't moments, rather than what I see and worry about for quite a lot of people when they're staying in careers that they don't like for 30 years, right? Now, 30 years, Rob, it's very different to 5 years. Like you can do a lot of shit in that time. And that's really the message that we are sharing and moving forward with now. So yeah, I hope that kind of explains and helps people to really understand what we're doing, and hopefully inspires people as well to actually think about been in this career, maybe it's approaching 10 years now, and actually I really love art. So, should I start to pursue that? So that's again what we're doing.
Definitely. It's interesting, the concept of regret, because you can look back on parts of your life and draw different things from it. It could be regret, or it could be, I lived this way for so long and I learned this awesome message, and I'm not going to do that again, because it's that experience changed me in a positive way, right? That 5 years didn't turn into 10 years, didn't turn into 30 years. And even if somebody who has been in a miserable job for 30 years, it's not too late for them. I hear people making excuses all the time. Oh, I'm 50, I'm 60, it's too late for
Still
me.
so young,
Yeah, exactly. You have so much time left, but people tend to give up on themselves for silly reasons like age. I mean, fear has a lot to do with it as well. And I'm big on also challenging myself. I think it's healthy to put yourself in uncomfortable situations from time to time. And that's another thing that I try to encourage, because people, I mean, I don't want to generalize and say that everybody limits themselves, but I think that a lot of people don't give themselves enough credit. You know, that they could achieve such
Mm.
amazing things if they really applied themselves and didn't give into fear and what other people think so much. So that's what I try to demonstrate. And even with this podcast, I mean, like, there's people that I'm sure watch this and say, what the fuck is he talking about? Like, this is such nonsense. But I don't care. I mean, I'm doing this partially as a self-development project, and just to, you
Mm.
know, show people, if you want to do something, go and do it. And who cares what your friend and neighbor says about it? Like, if you want to do it, go for it.
So like talking on consciousness as we were talking beforehand, what I've come to learn is because obviously at times I've had maybe people actually say stuff about stuff that I'm doing. I've come to realize that actually that and them saying that is actually where their consciousness is at. So it just brings it back around to the full circle of how, for me anyway, like everything is consciousness, right? Their state of consciousness is at that level where they see someone, you doing something really good for the world, right? And creating a great platform, and decide either consciously or subconsciously that uh, that is, I don't know what actually what they think, but they decide that it's not good and decide to spread hate ultimately. There was also and even with those people, like I just actually try to deploy empathy towards that, because there was this also great thing I came across, and I don't want to mess it up, so forgive me if I do. It was something like that, how in each moment we're all operating from the highest level of consciousness that we can, again, like in each moment, basically based on everything that has gone before in our life, which I was like, huh, wow. So like when somebody is maybe let's say I have an argument, or somebody like wants to start an argument with me, I'm not that type of guy. I'm quite relaxed and don't like confrontation or anything. So I would just say, like, we'll come back to this when you're in a calmer state or something. Um, so I've I've come to realize that actually that is their, maybe something happened in their childhood, right, whereby that was the norm. So they think that's the norm. So that actually they're operating from the highest point of consciousness that they can, and that profound, that understanding was really profound to me. Again, I'm not perfect, and sometimes I have to remember it, like really consciously remember it. But that was just so profound, and hopefully that also helps other people as well. Maybe they've got some difficult people in their life, or maybe they're doing something like you and becoming a creator, right, and getting hate and trolls and stuff. And that again, and that understanding has helped me to realize that actually we're all operating from the highest level of consciousness. We're all doing in some way like the best that we can based on that, and that I think it comes back to the point you mentioned beforehand about the world becoming very I like to call it red and blue. Ultimately, like you're all either on one side or the other. When the answer, again, this is another Gary Vaynerchuk thing, when the world is like purple, right, is in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just try to develop like that empathy for people, which is really hard sometimes, and just come back to that understanding, like, okay, you're acting this way. I'm just going to take some time, because yeah, we're all doing. I believe that on some level we're all doing the best that we can, and most times like it isn't our fault. Like, say we react in a certain way, but it is our responsibility to change it. If these things happen in our childhood when we're growing up, like they're not our fault. But we can also use that as reasons and justification. We need to also take responsibility for that, in order to create a new future, and hopefully for it not to uh, happen again, like as we bring up our family, right, and we go and create our families as well. So yeah, I just thought I'd share that understanding because it's been quite transformational for me.
Absolutely. So listen, Luke, I don't want to keep you too much longer. I know
Okay,
it's later where you are in the world.
absolutely.
But I really appreciate the time. I want to end on a fun question, which is, can you recommend one book, one movie, and one podcast that you think anybody listening could benefit from?
Okay, so podcast, because I've got really into this podcast recently. It's called Diary of a CEO. It's by an entrepreneur in the UK called Stephen Bartlett. He has some really great guests on, and a little bit different, so I've been very much in like personal development podcasts up to this point and stuff. But on this podcast, I mean, I just like so many different guests on, like sports stars. So I'm a huge football fan. So that's soccer for our American friends and stuff. So he has like ex football players on. I just find it really interesting because it's like a different type of learning. It's like learning through people's uh, stories and experiences. Where I guess I also still listen to other podcasts that are a bit more intellectual, I guess, where it's a bit more like 5 tips to change your health, right? which are great. It's quick, you get the information. But what I love about this podcast is that you're learning more through people's stories, and some of them are like quite emotional. Guests are broken down crying, and it's just very fascinating to dive into these other worlds. And again, I always come back to it. For me, it's like raising consciousness as well, because so often we from the outside we may judge a sports star like, oh, your life is so easy because you get paid millions of pounds. But actually when you listen to actually what it's like on a daily basis, or their journey to get there, you don't realize the hours and sacrifice to get to that point, the hours of training, the so many other different things. And I actually had a guest on my podcast who was a basketball player, where we spoke about this as well. We dived into the life of an athlete, and that was fascinating. So that would be a podcast. You said a book. So a book. Oh, I've read so many books. Let me think. What quick one. So there's a book that I read last year that stands out to me right now. It's called Buddha and the Badass by an author called Vishen Lakhiani. He's the founder of a company called Mind Valley that I'm actually a member of. And that is a personal growth platform. It's completely changed my life as well. That's where I've learned a lot of. So they actually have like many different health programs, which is where I've learned a lot about kind of health transformation, um, spiritual growths as well. So I definitely check out that book. It's basically, for a little quick summary, because I know we're running out of time, is like the Buddha is kind of like that, very contemplative and meditative kind of person within ourselves. So the person you might like journaling, like those sorts of things, and then like the badass is that person who uses that as inspiration to go out into the world and to shake things up, to challenge the status quo, because they have that, I guess, that consciousness of actually what they want to, an intention, right? What they want to create. And it kind of talks through that actually sometimes there are maybe too many badasses that are just going around causing chaos, and they don't have like that Buddha nature. And then you have like the Buddha nature people which I think which I resonate more with, where I could just like meditate all day, right? And just like be on my own all day, like really Zen like. But they oftentimes don't create transformation in the world. And so it's about bringing those two worlds together, which I think is very important. And then a film movie. So I don't watch a lot of films and stuff. And I think for obviously what we're talking about, what we want to do here is to help people. But so, oh, I mean, to be honest, I love like James Bond films. Although I don't know like how that's good. I don't know how that's gonna like change someone's life. But
It could just be a cool movie. It doesn't matter. I
yeah,
watched Top
okay.
Gun Maverick last week with my
Oh yeah,
wife, and I thought it
how
was
was that?
incredible. I loved
It
it.
was good.
Yeah,
So I've actually meant to. I haven't watched that yet, but my parents want to, and they're like, over Christmas, do you want to watch it with us? And I'm like, I'm not sure. So if you recommend it, my friend, I might have to give it a go.
it's worth it. Give it a go.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, I would say like the latest James Bond films are also one of my favorites. But all to be honest, actually, all James Bond films with Daniel Craig in I like. So any one of those.
Cool. Awesome, Luke. I think we could talk a lot more, so maybe we should do this again in the future.
Absolutely.
I'm excited to join you on your show as well. So with that, we can wrap it up. Everybody, check Luke out. Tell everyone where they can find you online.
Yeah, so I'm everywhere under the same username, which is real Luke Burrows. That's real Luke Burrows. And I'm not sure if this is going to go out straight away or like what's the deal. But if you want to learn more about what the new business or the merger of what everything that I'm doing, then you can go to the website, which is letslfo.com. That's letslfo.com. And yeah, we're launching the first thing that we're kind of, as we merge everything together, the first thing that we're doing is launching a community, because I think community is really important, so they can learn more about that at that website.
Awesome. All those links will be in the video description for people to find. So thanks again, Luke. I'll talk to you hopefully soon.
Excellent, my friend. Thank you for having me.